give reviewers no options and you leave us no choice. Let's talk about John Q.
Hello everyone, welcome back. We are back, the Eye of the Storm podcast. So today we're going to be doing Have You Seen? Daniel, for any new audiences, new viewers, new listeners, can you please explain to them what this series is about?
So this is Have You Seen, in which we talk about a movie that some of us know well and others have just seen for the first time. This week we are talking about the 2002 drama film John Q, which Jonathan, you suggested this one, and Hervé and I had never seen before. So why don't you give a brief synopsis about what John Q is all about?
This film, John Q, for me is a personal classic. For those who don't know what John Q is about, it's featuring Denzel Washington, plays John Q Archibald. He lives with his wife, and his wife called Denise, and his son called Michael. And Michael ends up needing a heart transplant, which John, the father, cannot afford because his insurance won't cover it. He tries to do everything he can to keep his son alive, but then the hospital nearly ends up kicking out the son due to the fact that they can't pay the down payment for how much it costs for a heart transplant. The down payment was 30% of the actual cost, and the actual cost was like 250 grand. And then he ends up leading to John taking the hospital emergency room hostage until the hospital performs a heart transplant on his son. This film, for me personally, is a classic. Now, even though when it was released, there was criticism, like it's got mixed reviews, this movie. I think a lot of the criticism came from the way that the subject matter was handled. And obviously, I think also they'll complain about stereotypes and obviously the lack of originality. But I think the main issue with the film was pretty much how the inaccuracies of like how the healthcare system in America was portrayed. However, that being said, I still think the film is a classic for many, many reasons. For me, I felt like it was a powerful and insightful film because obviously I didn't know what the healthcare system was like in America. Like, for obviously, I'm from the UK, so it's free. I'm saying for us, of course, we have to pay tax, but it's still free for us. So I didn't know. After watching that movie, I was like, damn, like Americans. I'm saying they really got it hard. They really got it hard out there. So I think for many reasons, which we'll talk about today, I think it was a very impactful, powerful film. But for you two guys, what did you think?
I enjoyed the movie. I thought it was cool. Again, it's got Denzel in it. Always good to see Denzel doing this thing in these movies. Like you said, it was like a good insight into healthcare issues that they have in America and how quickly life can change and go wrong for you if one bad thing happens and you need some type of emergency care. I also thought as well it explored being a man and being a father and being something responsible and things like that quite well in this movie as well. For me, it was a little bit too long. I think what the movie was trying to do was like really hammer home the point of him exhausting all of his options and all the different departments and organizations that you can reach out to when you need some support, and then of course being left helpless when the system just won't help you out. So I feel like it ironed out its point, but maybe a little bit too much. And there was a certain point where I was like, okay, maybe they could have shaved off 20 minutes or so from the movie. It was a little bit implausible how he held the whole hospital hostage, to be honest. I was a bit like, did someone not want to just like leave or break a glass, try to go through a window or something like that? I don't know. It just wasn't, I don't know, completely plausible how he held.
To be fair, it was inspired by true events, though. Just wanted to put that out there.
No, which is fair, and it'd be good to know. I didn't realize that, but it'd be good to know about the true events. But yeah, I think overall, I think it was like a good movie for me.
Yeah, so for me, it was a really mixed bag. So I think there's different pieces to this movie. Some of them work quite well and others not so much. The things that work quite well is John's character and his emotional state, right? Like his futile attempts to raise this money to save his son, right? One thing I was also kind of impressed with is with how much nuance it deals with the like the topic of healthcare and funding healthcare and all of that. And there's a few different pieces to this, which I'm sure we can go into. But just as an example, there's the scene where he takes the emergency room hostage and suddenly he is responsible for all of these people. And there's somebody, I think, with a knife wound. There's a pregnant woman who's about to give birth. There's, various emergencies. And just for a minute, he is put into the position of running a healthcare system. And he realizes it's not that simple. It's not as simple as just treat everybody, because you have to make choices and you have to allocate resources. And, suddenly he's put into the position of the people who were previously, standing in the way of his son getting better. And that's kind of where I perked up for a minute, where I said, oh, like that's actually kind of really interesting. I didn't expect this movie to go there. On the negative side, they do in the end just, first of all, they resolve this with a coincidence, right? It just happens to be that there's somebody who dies in a car crash who is a perfect fit for the son. And so there's just the perfect donor heart that just happens to be there, right? And in a movie about, okay, what do we do if we want to have a healthcare system that actually helps people and does right by everybody, leaning into a coincidence like this is probably a bad choice. And I think it's to the movie's detriment that that was put there on purpose, right? This is supposed to be a miracle, but you can't run a healthcare system on miracles, right? And then second one is where in the last 5 minutes, it actually does become about standing up to the corrupt system, and the crowd completely turns on the cops and on the hospital. And John becomes like a folk hero, and he's celebrated even as he goes to prison. And like that ending, I felt was quite unsatisfying. But everything that led up to it, the first 80% of it are actually pretty heavy on nuance and on showing it from the point of view of the hospital, right? And for it to kind of end kind of almost with a rug pull like this, I didn't like it. Let's talk about it.
I got a few things to say. I think let me start with the latest thing that you said in terms of the way that it ended, and I understand why you said that, because I remember we had a conversation in the office not too long ago about the guy that killed that CEO. Yeah, and you obviously didn't like the reaction where people were pretty much supporting him, right? So I had a feeling that you weren't gonna like the way that the film ended.
My hot take is political violence is bad, and you shouldn't solve problems like this. You should solve it through political action. And I was really disturbed by how that guy got celebrated, and kind of similar, like John is not a murderer, right? In this, in the end, but he's kind of being celebrated also as a folk hero like this. And when that incident happened, a lot of people brought up John Q, brought up this movie, and said, "See, like this is like, see, right? Like now it's happening," kind of thing. This movie is prescient. This movie predicted all of that. So that's just like that's where I was coming from in that moment.
But could you say, but because one argue and say, but the whole point of that scene, because someone can say, but well, that is realistic. That's how a lot of the people within the public would respond. So with your opinion saying you didn't like it, that you could, or you say you didn't like it because you don't feel like that's how movies should end and that's what the message should be, or is it more so that you didn't like it because that's just personally how you feel? It's got nothing to do with the movie being like that being a bad ending in terms of like its delivery or just the quality of it, but it's just like a personal feeling of how you feel when it comes to, like you say, the whole violence towards like just CEOs, etc., etc. That the whole political, there shouldn't be like political violence and stuff like that. You said.
So John is already on thin ice with me because what he's doing is not a solution, right? It is he's using violence to get his son treatment, but it's not the solution to the system, right? If like, and this movie for its first 85% doesn't really advocate that, right? It shows that this is a person who tries to do the right thing. Like the tagline says, if you give him no option, he has no choice, right? And that is kind of the point, is like, if you watch just the first 80% of it, like the first 100 minutes or so, he is not a hero for doing this. He's not a hero for taking the emergency room hostage. He's not a hero for kidnapping the heart surgeon, and he's not a hero for doing any of this. But we understand why he does it, right? We understand why he's back to Flat Corner. For an hour we've spent watching him trying to do the right thing, and it doesn't work. It's not enough. No matter what he does, his son will die unless he does the wrong thing. That is a really interesting character moment, as long as the movie does not say, see, this is what everybody should do. And this is kind of reflected in the scenes where the police kind of talk amongst each other and basically say, if we let this guy go, this will happen again and again and again. And that is true. Like, that is why a government like has to go after people who do stuff like this, right? No matter how much they sympathize, because if everybody does it, like if that is the way you get your way, then everybody will do it. And like, if we really want to go into it, like how many people died that day because they couldn't get to an emergency room because it was closed, right? So it's just not a way to fix the system, and it's not a way that actually works. It's a way for one person to get what they want. And I think for the first 100 minutes, this movie remembers this. And in all sorts of scenes and interactions and lines, this idea is reflected. And I think even John knows it. Like, even John knows this is not how you fix the system. This is how I get my way, and this is how my son lives. And because of that, I like the first 100 minutes. And then in the end, it flips the script. And that is what I didn't like, because no, it's not so much about it says the wrong thing or anything like that. I absolutely do think people should agitate for better outcomes in a like in a healthcare system, right? But the movie basically spent most of its runtime setting up one type of moral, and then it delivered a completely different one in the very end, and that is the part I didn't like.
To kind of answer back on that one, is it the movie's job to advocate for what the better healthcare system should be? Because, like you said, the movie does everything it should up until that point. It shows you a person that's, very desperate and is, confronted by a healthcare system that works completely against them. And if you don't have the money, then essentially his son is going to die. So in that sense, the movie brings out the right emotions in terms of, making you empathetic, making you understand. And actually, in a world where, you have these CEOs, etc., that only see people as a number, like you had the lady in this who, for the most part, is just doing her job and is just following procedure, where she's saying, like, this is what you need and we need this amount. We can't just do this procedure. At that moment, she's seeing him as just another patient. But then when you have those heartfelt moments, especially the one when he's speaking to his son and it's being broadcasted live, and you have that empathetic reaction to it, it's more so highlighting the issues and the inequalities within the system, as opposed to, really trying to draw up strong advocacies for how the system should change realistically. And I don't know whether I can put it on the movie to be like, okay, what's your solution or what's your answer? I understand the whole, it being a miracle, not completely working, because I also, don't think I like that in the movie. And I think it would have been a little bit more poignant if he'd sacrificed himself for his son and for his son to continue to live. But I don't know. I just don't feel like the movie needed to have the solution to it. It was more, this is his story, and the reason why it resonates with so many people is that other people can sort of see the desperation and see how they could be like John Q.
I completely agree. It's not that the movie has to present a workable solution. It's more like, for much of the movie it says one thing and then in the end it says another, and the two don't really line up. That's my point.
How does it not line up?
So in the first 100 minutes, it basically shows the complexities of doing this, right? It's not simply about one person, right? This is not simply about Michael getting a heart. It's about everybody who needs a heart getting a heart, right? And even when we see the corporate types and the hospital administrators, they're not uncaring. They just have they have a job to do and they have a system to administer, and it serves more people than just this one family, right? I think there are many sequences in this where it kind of underlines this complexity. There are various moments where, the director or other, administrators are visibly frustrated about how I believe that they would like to help, and if they had a heart ready, they would give it to Michael. But it's more about there just isn't, right? Like, it's not as simple as that, right? If there's a villain in this, it's probably the employer who, in order to save costs, kind of downgraded John's coverage. And that is kind of the source of his problems, right? Like, if I remember correctly, the original policy would have covered the transplant, and then the new one doesn't, because it's got a lower cap, right, in terms of what it will cover. And that is John's problem, right? And also that he wasn't told this, or maybe he was told this at one point, but as part of like a 50-page booklet that he was mailed at one point, maybe, if that, right? And he just had no way of really understanding what that meant for him. I've received like these kind of booklets from health insurance, right? And I have no idea what they say. I don't, and you find out what's covered and what's not, like, in the moment. So if there's a villain here, it's the employer who went for the worst coverage just to save some money, right? And this whole dilemma of, well, you get paid for, or your coverage is based on what you actually work and not what your contract says, and that is really the part where he's screwed by the system, right? Once we get to the actual medical part of it, I don't think there's a villain there.
I agree. I don't think that there is necessarily a villain there, but it's more, the villain is the system and how the system operates. Because, like you said, is that, it's not about should his son get a heart. It's like everyone should get a heart. But then the movie's highlighting why not everyone can get a heart, and like why, you had that rich man in the wheelchair, why he was able to afford it quite easily and continue with his life like nothing, really happened. It was just like a period of time in him where he just had to, live uncomfortably. And again, this is kind of like reading into a story, but he's like laughing and joking with the doctor that performed the surgery on him, and it's all fine. But then you have the complete opposite of that, where you have John Q, who is struggling and he's doing everything he can to try and afford it for his son, but he can't. So it's not like the individual people are bad. It's more how the system and how everything currently is works against people from lower income. It's through no fault of John. It's just like, one unfortunate situation to another, because the reason why he had to have his healthcare plan downgraded by his employers was because there wasn't enough work for him anymore. They were hiring cheaper labor from across the border, which was oversaturating the workforce, which meant that he wasn't able to earn enough. And again, it's just situations in life that can happen at any point. There will be a situation where your work situation changes, and just because your work situation changes, should that mean that you shouldn't have access to healthcare and you shouldn't be able to save your son just because of a moment in time in your life? So, yeah, that's why I was like, I see why you're saying it doesn't completely marry up, but for me, it's like, this is the problem, this is how it works, and this is why it's not working for everyone.
Yeah, I just didn't think that the bulk of the movie led up to that kind of moment where he is celebrated in this way, and where the movie frames him as like a rebel standing up to the system and stuff like this, right? Especially since it shows his actions up until that point in such an ambiguous way.
But it's more just like the empathy side of things. It's more, this is how the majority of people can relate to him or empathize with him, because again, they can see themselves in him. They could quite easily be in a similar situation. It might not be their son dying. It might just be an accident that they have somewhere. They might like break a bone or something like that, and immediately are in a desperate situation where you're now stuck with thousands and thousands of pounds of debt just because a few dominoes fell in the wrong way for you.
So it comes in, John Q, he pretty much represents an everyman. That's why, especially with, and I think that for me personally, I think I kind of like the ending, because even though he was celebrated, which is realistic, that's one thing, one of the reasons why I liked it, because there's realism in that. Like I keep mentioning the comparison with the guy that killed the CEO. People are glorifying the guy, so there was realism in it, and also it does show that even though what he was doing was honorable, it still had consequences. Do you know what I'm saying? So it wasn't a thing where he did what he did and he got away scot free. No, like there was going to be consequences for his actions. So that's, for me, I was like, okay, that's very, I like the way that the film ended, because it wasn't, even though the film was unrealistic in a way, and the reason why I say in a way is because the story that was inspired by that guy that actually ended up doing that ended up dying. Like they ended up killing him, the police. So yeah, but even though it was exaggerated in a way, it kind of like toned down the exaggerated and made it more realistic by the ending, by showing that, okay, like you still broke the law, you still have to get punished, even like I said, even though what you did is something which I believe that's, it kind of raises to my next question. I believe like a lot of, and I don't think a lot of parents would do that. However, a lot of parents would resonate with him and they wouldn't really go against him, and they'll kind of like, in a way, be supportive of him, because kind of like I'm saying, it goes into my next question. Like one thing that this film definitely does really, really well is kind of like, explores ethical dilemmas, and it obviously raises the tough question: was he right? And what would you do in that situation? And that's how I feel like that's what kept me engaged in the film. Obviously, I think one of the main reasons why the film obviously worked as well is kind of just like it was insightful in terms of showing the inaccessibilities of the healthcare systems to Americans, in terms of like, specific demographics, like what Hervey was saying before. So I think that's definitely one of the highlights of the film. However, another good thing about the movie for me was, the whole ethical dilemmas. So that's my first question. Do you guys actually think he was right?
He was sympathetic,
I
but he
don't.
wasn't right.
Yeah, that's
But
the
but
same
but
thing I was
see it in
saying.
the lens of a father, though. See it in the lens, if you had a child roughly the same age as Michael, and and you're in that final situation, the same final situation that John Q is in, and you're doing everything that you can to raise money, and then you're finding out that they're about to kick your son out, and as soon
Mhm.
as they kick your son out, he's gonna die. Think of it in that lens.
It's absolutely understandable why he does what he does, right? Like that's not the point. Like that's not the issue, right? But you can understand why somebody does something and still think they shouldn't do it.
You can understand why the healthcare people did what they did, even though you
Yeah.
can say it's wrong. You can understand why they, had to follow what the protocol was, because they can't just willy nilly abandon how the hospital is run just for one person, because in that might break, whether the system is right or wrong, it might then break the system. So they're just following their policies and following what they're doing, and it doesn't mean that what they're doing is right.
It's not a scalable solution, right? You cannot do this for everybody. Like what the hospital is trying to do is you've got this many hearts and you've got this many people who need a heart and you need to line them up. And it's not going to work for everybody. But I believe that they were trying to do it for as many people as possible. And I kind of appreciated that that is what they were trying to do. And really what I think this comes down to is the difference between the systemic level and the personal level. This movie shows that those two are not the same. What is good for the system is not necessarily good for any one individual, right? And that is kind of what we've been dancing around for 20 minutes now, is that at least I think like the hospital is at least portrayed as trying to do the right thing for like overall, and John Q happens to lose out in that. And we see it from a perspective of somebody who loses out. And then what do you do? And I think that is kind of why, like, my tendency is to look at it from a systemic level. Like, I'm always interested in what's the solution, right? Like, how do you make this better overall, as opposed to does the guy with the gun get his way?
But you can tell he didn't want to be that guy though, and he
True.
even like didn't have that. Even when he didn't have bullets in his gun, that just signified that listen, that's not his intention, and he knows that his way is not the right way. Because I think if he genuinely believed in what he was doing, I feel like symbolically, his gun would have had bullets in them. But because it didn't have bullets in them, it still showed that okay, this way isn't the right way. However, I have to do something. I'm at breaking point.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? So I do hear what I do hear what you're saying.
What was interesting as well about not just him in this movie, but just the whole portrayal of masculinity and being a man, because from the offset when their car is being towed away, it's like the woman's being like, "What are you going to do about it? Like, you need to fix this," and it's just like that mindset that he carried throughout the whole movie, is that everything that was happening, he was under the pressure and he was the one that had to make something happen. And again, that's kind of like it run parallel to the whole theme of the healthcare and whether the system's right or wrong or whether it's broken. But you also had this idea of what it means to be a man and what it means to keep your word and what it means to protect and provide for the ones around you. It was just like interesting to see how much he was burdened with in this movie, and the reason he got to the point where he had to essentially hold hostage the entire ER ward was because he'd made that promise, and he thought as a man he can't deviate from that. He can't let his word mean nothing, essentially. So yeah, it was interesting to see how that was portrayed and how that was kind of like analyzed throughout the movie. And then you had the whole speech that he gave to his son at the end about taking care of his mother, always listening to his mother. I can't remember exactly everything he says to him, but it was kind of all of that, which was like just interesting to see.
Yeah, and he's also being railroaded into impossible situations, right? Like if we want to go into the gender topic, like he's a bit like the ideal of masculinity is setting him up for failure, right? Because he keeps doing the responsible thing and it keeps coming up short, and he's being personally blamed for it because of who he is, right? Like when his car gets towed, he probably should have talked to his wife about it, about how hey, we have to let the car payments lapse or whatever it was, because it's either that or the house, and we kind of need a house, right? And that is the correct call. Like, I don't think you can blame him for that. His mistake in that situation was maybe he should have told his wife, or maybe they should have maybe done something more proactively about it. Like, I don't know what, but right? But he was basically just hoping it would work out, right? But he made a call and he made the right decision in that moment when he decided which of the two bills to pay, right? Or also when he, I think it's when Denise calls him and says, "Hey, they are going to kick Michael out because we can't pay. Do something." What's he supposed to do? Like, he has been doing everything in his power for months, like for weeks, months at this point, right? Like working extra shifts, taking odd jobs. Like, at least the way the movie portrays it, I think he does all of it, right? And if we want to go there, like this is like a showcase of how that kind of idea is destructive in its own way.
Yeah, that scene for me was a highlight moment I was going to mention, because that was like his breaking point. But it was such a powerful breaking point because, like you said, it links into like masculinity and the role of a father, right? And how it kind of like shows it for me. I think it highlighted and showed how hard being a father can be and the amount of responsibility a father can end up having if they're in a situation where their family's pretty much at rock bottom, and how much they have to kind of like deal with to kind of uplift them again. So for that scene there, like, especially like his expression when the wife said it, you could tell that that was the moment where he cracked. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And realized that it's me that have to save my family, even though I am literally, like you said, he was doing everything that he could, even though he was literally at his wit's end. He had to go above that, and above that is insanity, and which was portrayed in him, taking the emergency room hostage.
Yeah. I mean, the thought that went through my head in that scene is, hey, what have you been doing? Like, you seem to be working part time in a restaurant. Or like, what other jobs
You
have you been
can't say
taking?
that to your wife, Daniel. You can't say
Well,
that to your wife.
You can't say
Try me. I'm just saying. But am I wrong that the movie does not show her take on any additional jobs?
I think it's set in a different time period because what this came out in 2002, and I think the idea of gender roles, etc., was completely different to what it is in a modern movie. And I feel like, I mean, I'm very sure actually, if this movie was made in 2025, you'd probably see the father as the one that didn't do anything, and the mother being the one that exhausted all of her options, which again isn't reality, because in a real life situation, I think both would be equally trying to do what they can for the family. But for whatever reason, we've gone from the man being superior to the mom being the superior and the man being a little bit useless. But
it's very rare for a movie to just show both be a team and both work together, right? And both be like equally noble or do the right thing or have the same amount of agency, right? It seems like the pendulum has to swing one way or the other, right? Like in this movie, the wife is completely passive and just makes demands. And if we go back to a movie like Wolfman, for instance, right, like the husband is completely standing in the background and the wife does everything. And you're kind of right that like that movies made in the last couple of years have been the other extreme. And like as a functioning adult, my question is, hey, why are you not sitting down and saying, okay, we're gonna make a list. Here's all the things we can do. This is what I can do. This is what you can do. This is how much we can raise. This is our plan, right? This is how functioning adults would do it. And instead, the movie puts it all on him. Apparently.
What I did like about that is it showed, because a lot of times with films set around like a black family, a lot of the times like the father's a deadbeat, but in this one it showed a father's sacrifice, and obviously of a father in a good light, even though it was a crazy light, but it was still in a good light. So yeah, that's something which I liked. But I was gonna ask, because Heather, you didn't mention whether you agreed with what he was doing or not, but adding on to that, because obviously you're a father now, so did you kind of like resonate with him before you answer your question in terms of if you found him to be right or wrong, or whatever your answer is, but did you kind of like resonate with him more than obviously I feel like you would have resonated with him more than me and Daniel, because obviously we ain't we don't have any kids, so like how did you kind of feel, like how did you feel when you're watching what he was doing?
No, I think I definitely resonated with going to the extremes. I mean, I've been fortunate; I've not faced a situation like that as of yet. I would like to think if there was anything wrong, that I would exhaust all of my options, everything possible to try to make the situation right any way that I could. It does hit a little bit differently, when you are a father and you kind of picture yourself in a situation. You picture your boy, especially when his kid just collapsed and they ended up finding out that he had the issue with his heart, because that's like a scary thing. And I've heard about it, and I've heard certain stories where, fortunately, it's not been anything serious, but I've heard a friend's kid has been sleeping and then in the middle of the night has just like had a seizure, and they've had to be rushed to hospital. And it's like just that blink of an eye of things could be fine, you can be things could be normal, but then in a moment everything's going completely wrong. It's a scary thought. It's a very scary thought. And even more so for like people that have like kids with allergies. Again, I'm like very grateful that my boy doesn't have any like peanut allergies or anything like that, because that would scare the living daylights out of me, like trying to take him anywhere. So I'm grateful he doesn't have that. But yeah, it's just that fear that of like anything can go wrong at any moment. And when things do go wrong, it's like you just have to do everything in your power. It doesn't matter what condition or what state you're in at that moment. You don't mean anything. It's all about trying to do what's best for your kids. So yeah, I definitely resonate with that. I don't know if I go to the lengths of holding up a hospital hostage. I've not been pushed that far yet, but yeah, who knows? Never say never.
So are you guys totally, I'm not trying to get us arrested or anything, and I'm not, by the way, if any governments, police police are watching this, this is not my opinion, I'm just saying, in any circumstance, right, any situation, do you guys believe that political violence is wrong under any circumstance?
That covers a lot of ground, right? Like I can imagine scenarios in which it's the lesser evil, right? And you can
I
point
can think of a
to
few.
like history, like if this dictator had been assassinated 5 years earlier, look, this is like this many people would not have died and stuff like this, right? Like there comes a point at which it becomes justified, right? But in my view, like this is like my big overarching political view, is that a system should be set up in such a way to facilitate solutions, which is not the same thing as it always does the perfect thing, but it should have a mechanism for arriving at solutions that don't use violence, because violence is not justice. Justice is like violence is just about whoever is strongest gets their way. And like if you really take like a really bird's eye view on the plot of this movie, what makes John Q more important than somebody else with a sick child that day, right? Like if Michael gets that heart, somebody else doesn't. And why is John Q more important? The answer is because we've seen him. He's a protagonist. He's played by Denzel Washington, and we like Denzel Washington, right? Like that is why. But he's not actually more deserving than somebody else. And I think that is why we see like the old rich guy who's joking with the doctor and whatever. Like the movie really has to lean on the scales to make somebody who did get a heart instead of Michael unsympathetic. But if it's just about a life, like this is ultimately a life for a life, right? And if you take the view that all life is equally important, then what John is doing is grossly immoral because
I mean,
he just happens to be the guy with the gun.
you had the other kid that was also in the room that was also dying. And of course, that was meant to be in the movie a reflection of what they didn't want to happen to them. But what if you're in a
Yeah.
situation where, like, if you take this heart, this kid dies and you're confronted with that situation, like, how do you react? Then does he become as sympathetic or does he become selfish and sort of not all about himself in that situation? I think you were going to mention about Jonathan, the rich person, why he deserved it over anyone else. And for me, it's if you've amassed the wealth and if you've got the means to afford it, then and that's how the system works, then you have every right to sort of use it as leverage for yourself in the system.
Yeah,
You
but
know,
then that kind of goes against the whole belief and notion that we're all equal and that the system's fair. It's pretty much having that. It's a capitalist. Obviously, it's capitalism. You know what I'm saying? But at the same time, it's like it shows that okay, it's a doggy dog world, man for themselves. You know what I'm saying? So that's still in a way. In a way, it's still kind of parallel to what John Q done because the argument is okay. So why does your son deserve it more than anyone else? It's the same thing with the rich person, but obviously the argument is because they have the money, they have the wealth, and that's just the way that the system is designed. And then someone could argue, well, that's not fair, and that goes against everyone being equal because we all know that everyone we're not living in a socialist society where everyone's pretty much where you know everything is equal. Do you know what I'm saying? So it's a thing where it's like okay, so we're not all equal by based on the way that the system is designed.
But there's a question between did the rich guy get the heart because he had money? Or was he a good match and he jumped through all the hoops and he waited his turn and then he was able to pay and therefore he got the heart? Or did he unfairly jump to the front of the queue because he had money? Those are two different things. And if it's the last one, then the movie didn't show it, right? We don't know how long he waited. We don't know whether or not he played by all the rules. We just see him be unsympathetic because he's old and rich and because he's joking with the doctor and he's being treated better by the doctor than John ever was, right? And they're certainly treating each other as peers, right? They're both like rich guys who may know each other from the country club or whatever. But what the movie doesn't show is that that the old rich guy should not have received the heart on the merits. If that is what wants to say in that instance, it should have shown it. It should have made it clear that he was in fact a worse match than somebody else, but he got it anyway because he had the money. And that would be a failure of the system.
But I think they showed it I think they showed that by kicking out the son because prior to the reason why because of the reason which is they didn't have enough money and obviously they wasn't raising enough money enough. So I think that shows okay. So if they did have the money, then they would have had the heart, even because they didn't reveal that they didn't have the heart. They just said obviously this is how much it will cost for the heart transplant, which obviously tells us that okay, like if you have the money, we'll be able to do the heart transplant. We ended up finding out later once obviously John ended up putting everyone in a hostage situation that they would need to find a compatible heart. And which, by the way, I liked as well, because a lot of people do not know that. A lot of just the average man doesn't know that. So that's why I feel like that's another reason why I like the film, because that was very realistic. And, you know, like I said, John Q represents the average human being. So, so I think they did, just to answer what you said, I think they did by threatening to kick out the son.
But that's not quite what happens. What happens is that they've been giving him more time than they should have, right? They make that point on multiple times. And then when he
Yeah.
can't come up with the money, then they kick him out because the bed is needed for somebody else, right? So what I'm just saying is if the old rich guy got the heart because he jumped the queue and he broke the rules and he essentially bribed his way into getting a heart, then that is just as bad as John Q picking up a gun and taking hostages. Like, that is morally equivalent. But the movie doesn't show that that is what is happening. It doesn't show that that is what it takes. The ability to pay is a filter, but it does not mean anybody who can pay automatically gets a heart, right? And if that's the point the movie wanted to make, then it needed to show that by showing how this guy jumped the queue and broke the rules and got preferential treatment at the expense of somebody else and so on, which is not an evidence.
I think it showed the realistic view that majority of people think the healthcare system is, how the healthcare system operates. You know what I'm saying? Because I think in the beginning, like the viewer, for me, I thought as well, if you have the money, you'll get the heart, and it felt like it was presented in that way by obviously the doctors, and then later on, you end up finding out that no, that's not how the healthcare system works. It works by you actually have to find a compatible heart. But that's something which I don't know if that's something which I'm pretty sure it's explained beforehand, but due to the purpose of this movie to kind of like just show the inaccessibilities of, you know, healthcare systems to Americans, obviously that's kind of like exaggerate that part. I think the average viewer believes as well that obviously the richer you are, the more access that you have to health. So I think they kind of, you got what I'm saying? They kind of like fit that criteria of let's just exaggerate that point that we're trying to make.
But it still needs to make the point, right? And like, one thing that is probably true is that the rich guy has a better policy than John has because he can afford it, and that probably covers more, and that might give him more access or whatever, right? Like, so I don't know the ins and outs of how it works exactly. It really depends on what point the movie is trying to make, right? If it's about, if you can't pay, you are left behind, then that scene definitely does their job. If it's about the rich get their way and you know, get preferential treatment, then the scene doesn't do its job, right? And it really comes down to what are you trying to say, and are you saying it effectively? And I think that scene is kind of an example of, it really depends, right? I think in that scene, ultimately what it's about is to rub it in to John that he cannot pay, right? He's not part of the club. He's not going to get that treatment. He's not going to be in that position. He will never be at that point where they're laughing with the doctor and Michael is, you know, has the new heart and they're all happy and they're going home and they're thinking about the future. I think ultimately that scene is meant to be a reminder to John about what he will not have. And that is why it's infuriating. I don't think it's supposed to make the point about how the healthcare system is paid to win, other than he can't afford it and the rich guy can afford it. But that is not all that's going on here. I think it is a kind of a reminder of what John is not getting. And I think that's different.
Yeah, that's a good point. I was going to ask, why did you guys have an issue with the miracle side of things when it comes to obviously the heart transplant?
So there's a principle in screenwriting that you cannot resolve a conflict by a coincidence. The conflict should be, or the resolution to a conflict should be the result of the choices a character makes and the actions they take on the basis of those choices. How John ends up should be a reflection of the choices he has made throughout the movie. And for a heart to just appear out of nowhere does not accomplish this. It's simply a cop-out. It means he doesn't have to make a choice. It means he's let off the hook and he gets what he wants anyway, even though he was about to make a difficult decision. And that's why it's crap screenwriting. Unless you're trying to make the point about how arbitrary this is and about how this is a luck of the draw and whatever, then fine, whatever. But just as a matter of, we've kind of built up this dilemma for a character and he's got a tough choice to make, but then he doesn't need to make it because the author says so. That's ultimately what this is. And it's kind of like in the Wikipedia page of this movie, the director is quoted as, well, this is a reflection of his faith and about how all you need is a miracle and whatever. And I think that's lame. I think that's like on a story level, on a thematic level, on a character level, it's a cop out. It does not like it's not interesting. It does not say anything. It just happens. Like this is like literally Deus ex machina, right? Like this is just the solution to our problem comes out of nowhere and everything is fine. Like that's not how good stories are made.
For me, it was a Hollywood ending. And when he was considering killing himself, I was like, I can see, the noble sacrifice, and that would have been a worthy ending, and it would have been a man that was pushed to the edge, but ultimately did pay the ultimate or sacrifice for his kid. But I knew it wasn't going to end like that, and I knew it was going to get the Hollywood ending where everything had to be sort of wrapped up quite neatly. And I thought in that moment they had the opportunity to do it, to sort of take a risk with the ending, but ultimately didn't. Sound to be like, okay, cool, it's just another happy ending that we're going to get from Hollywood. When I think it would have served the story a little bit better if he was willing to give his heart up for his son.
See, the ending where he shoots himself to give his son a heart, that's the interesting one. That's the one I want to see. Because it's tragic and it's basically saying the system is so broken, this is what it took. And like that would have been like yes, it would have been a downer, yes, it would have been tragic, but it also would have been good.
I hate what you guys are saying. I necessarily didn't have issues with it because I already felt like they already kind of like gave signs that it was going to be like a miraculous ending, especially with like the scene of the priest when he was praying over the girl, even though she did die. I think for me, I do hear what you guys are saying, and I do have issues with unrealistic, miraculous endings, coincidental endings, right? I do have issues with that. However, I think certain endings like that get a pass if it's got like, depending on the reason. Like for example, if it's like a Christian theme to it or Christian theme to it, right? I feel like those get a pass because already that is a paranormal event, you know what I'm saying, that's taking place. And there are some, unexplainable things that happen within, I'm saying, in hospitals where people are just, I'm saying, they're miraculously cured from whatever their, disease or, whatever situation that they're in, you know what I'm saying? That does happen. So that's why for me, I didn't have an issue with it because I'm like, okay, I do know that there are miracles that sometimes do take place. A lot of the times I'm Christian, so I just have an outlook from a Christian perspective. But I do understand where you guys are coming from, though.
Yeah, and I think the movie should have made a bigger point out of that. If that is what it's about, right? Like, yeah, we see him be in church and we see him praying. It's not like it comes completely out of nowhere, but it is just as a story. I don't think it quite works. I think you can tell a story about this, right? But then you have to design the story around that, and then you have to build up to it, and then you have to establish like what kind of story this is and what this is about earlier on, so that it doesn't seem like a convenient coincidence.
Well, I don't know if anyone else has anything that they want to say before we go to last thoughts, but last thoughts, guys.
For me, I think overall it's a good movie, and it's quite topical for Americans. And I know that there has been things to try and change the system. I don't know the ins and outs of it, but there's not buzzwords, but comments like Obamacare that was that they tried to implement. And I don't know what situation that they're in now, and whether it's improved from when this movie was made. But yeah, it was very kind of topical, gave good insight into some of the issues that I'm grateful that we don't have over here in the UK. It made you feel the emotions again, especially the phone scene when he's talking to his son, and just like the desperation that he had all throughout the movie. You were sort of really there with him on that journey. You really felt the emotion, you felt the helplessness of him in this. So yeah, I think overall I enjoyed this movie.
Yeah, so I think this movie has some really great parts and some not so great parts. On the not so great parts is the ending. On the great parts is really the character stuff, where we really feel for the position that John and his family are in, and the dilemmas that they face, and the great lengths to which they go, and it's not enough, and what do you do then? Like that part, I think really works. So overall, I thought it was a good watch. I just really care about endings, and if a movie builds up, like is really good throughout, and then builds up to a not so great ending, then that's kind of a bummer. But overall, I did enjoy watching it.
Yeah, for me, like I said, it's one of my classics. I think for three reasons, just like the insightful social commentary, the ethical dilemma, and I'm saying the questions that it raises, and just Denzel's performance. I felt like he definitely pulled off the desperate dad vibes, and it definitely made you kind of like resonate with him. But at the same time, it created that conflicting feeling, whether he's right or whether he's wrong. So yeah, man, I think overall, yeah, like I said, for me, it was a classic, and I enjoyed the conversation today. I'm saying, I feel like a film that can make you debate, especially when it comes to, like I said, the ethical dilemmas and just, I'm saying, the questions that it raises. I think is a good film. Guys, thank you very much for tuning into today's episode. I hope you enjoyed the debate.
If you reached this part of the episode, thank you very much for working with us. We always appreciate your support. Of course, if you liked everything that you heard today and you enjoyed our discussion, tell a friend. And if you hated everything and you thought we were chatting a bunch of nonsense, you should probably tell an enemy. We are the Eye of the Storm podcast.
All right, guys, thank you very much, and we'll catch you next week. Au revoir.
Ciao.
Bye bye.